Get honest. Ask yourself, what seeds am I sowing now? What prayers am I praying now that I am expecting God's promises, answers, and to reap the harvest from in the future? Hey, 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 Beacon. Welcome home to your Bounce Back Blueprint Community Podcast. I'm your Bounce Back Guide, Tiffany Huff Struthers. So excited to have you here with me today. This week's episode is being brought to you by The Currency of Clarity, a free self care training that is being held Tuesday, July 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is exactly what you need if you are feeling stuck or uncertain about how to move forward on your bounce back journey in the midst of all that's going on around you. You can grab the link in the show notes to join us. TiffanyHuffExperience.com/clarity. Now, before we dig into what I have to share with you today, let's do a review. This review is from underscore energy, and it says, this podcast is definitely a godsend. Tiffany is an amazing leader, teacher, and woman of God. She breaks concepts down in a way that very palatable. Excuse me, and I have been blessed by her wisdom. I absolutely love Tiffany and her wisdom and grateful for what she contributes to my spirit and personal growth via her teachings and this podcast. Thank you so much, Energy, for sharing that review. If you have not already, please take the time to leave a review wherever you are listening. And of course, as you do, I will take the opportunity to share and shout you out because I certainly appreciate all of you for the love. And know that when you spread the love, you create opportunities for other beacons just like you to gain access and be blessed by what is being shared in the Bounce Back Blueprint community. So, today we are digging into what I believe firmly to be the truth, and that is now is what's next. Now is what's next. And let me tell you about how I came to sharing this with you. Not long ago, I was being interviewed for a live podcast recording, and the interviewer asked me, what is next for Tiffany? What's next for the Tiffany Huff experience? And I think she was, as was the audience, was very surprised by my response. And my response is more of what I'm doing. Now is what's next. And like I said, she was kind of surprised. I think the audience was kind of surprised. And she was just like, okay. And I said, yes, I believe that I am doing the work that I am called to do. I believe that I'm in position to serve the people I am called to serve. What might change is that God may enlarge my territory. I may get a farther reach. I might have opportunity to impact more women. But ultimately, the work that I am doing now is laying the foundation for the work that I will continue to do. And after I shared that with her, she was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I get it, right? When you get in alignment with your divine assignment, when you have that covenant, intimate connection with God, then you recognize that there are going to be peaks and valleys, and you are able to embrace them, knowing, like I spoke about in the last episode, knowing that there is going to be breakthrough, there is going to be manifestation, knowing that His promises, even in seasons that are challenging, are still yes and amen. And so I want to share with you three truths that you can embrace in this season, specifically if it's challenging for you in the midst of this pandemic, in this season that we're in, to really feel like you are growing forward, to feel like you are still on your bounce back journey, to feel like you are still connected to God, that you still hear Him. I really want to share these with you because it's a challenging time. But what I know for sure is that this will not be the only challenging time, right? Once we are through this season, there will be something else, though it may not be something that impacts us all the way this is impacting us. It will be something that you will face, you will be challenged with, a giant you will have to stand up to. And I want you to to embrace these three truths. So that you can encourage yourself, right? Sometimes we do have to encourage ourselves. And so, one of the things that is very important in this time, in a time when you are facing a challenge in the journey to bouncing back, one of the things that is very important is that you remember that what you do in the dark will always come to light. And of course, that's the Tiff's Truth version, or I should say the Tiff's Notes version of a biblical truth. And here is the actual scripture. It comes from Luke 12:3, and it says, "What you have said in the dark will be heard in the daylight, and what you have whispered in the ear in the inner rooms will be proclaimed from the roofs." And so I don't, again, want you to hear me saying that this time is a bad time, right? It is challenging for many reasons. But for many of us, this is a season of quote unquote darkness, right? This is a season where God has shut a lot of things down. This is a season where God has given us the opportunity. Let me repeat that. God has given us the opportunity to retreat into our homes, into our sacred spaces, into our prayer closets, right? This is an opportunity to be in the dark where people do not necessarily see everything that you're doing, but what you are doing now is going to come to light. And I want you to be mindful that I'm not saying you need to be pressured to start a business. I'm not saying you need to be pressured to lose 100 pounds. I'm not saying you need to be pressured to do anything that the world is expecting, but God has given you this time of darkness. God has given you this time to retreat. God has created, an opportunity for you to have the space to reconnect with Him, right? To reconnect with yourself, to reconnect with the vision and the mission that He has placed on your life. God is giving you this time in the dark to prepare for Him to get the glory when things come to light. And that is what perspective you need to have when you are thinking about now is what's next. What prayers are you praying that God is preparing you for in this season of darkness to come to light when He sees fit, right? What are you feeding yourself, mind, body, spirit, that is going to birth out what God has placed deep down inside of you when things come to light? What are you doing now for what is to come next? And for some of us, this is specifically a season of reconnecting with God. For some of us, our bounce back journey has not felt like we are bouncing back at all. It has felt like habitual setback after setback after setback, and now the pandemic and setback and setback and setback. And for many of us, it is because we lack the clarity necessary to know what to do now for what is next. And that is because we lack that connection with God. And so I want to challenge and encourage you in your times of quote unquote darkness, right? And again, this for all of us is a season of not constantly being in the spotlight because of the opportunity of the pandemic with the shutdown and the stay-at-home orders. But even more than that, even if you are an essential worker, if you are somebody who is out in these streets every day because you have to do the work, right? Because you are serving and leading, God bless you if that's you. I want you to consider what you're doing in the literal darkness, right? Sometimes, in order for now to prepare us for what's next, we need to be up before anyone else is up, right? Spending time with God, spending time in our word, reading to feed ourselves for the work that God has for us to do, whether it's reading the word or reading something else. What are you doing now to plant the seeds for the harvest you are praying to reap later? Right? What are you doing in the evenings when you get back home? And I'm not saying that it's not okay to Netflix and chill, but when Netflix and chilling becomes a lifestyle in the dark, you will be surprised. You can't be surprised or upset or angry with God about what manifests when you come back into the light. right? So I want you to really consider in this season of darkness, in your times of quote unquote darkness, when you're alone or when you're alone with God, what is it that you're doing that you are praying and preparing for to come to light? Because what you do in the dark will come to light. And if you feel like you don't know what to do in the dark, then that leads to the second point that I want to make, right? That leads to the second thing you need to remember, and that is that the work is in the worship. And sometimes the work requires active waiting. Yes, you got that right. The work is in the worship, and sometimes the work requires active waiting. And I know you might think active waiting, that's pretty oxymoronic. Well, it kind of is. But you know that all things in the spirit are not always logical, right? On this bounce back journey, you're going to have to do some things that you haven't done if you expect to get what you have not gotten. And then that is the manifestations of God's promises for your life, right? And so active waiting looks to the naked eye, right? To those who aren't spirit led, again, to those who don't have the clarity and that covenant connection with God, active waiting looks like you are doing nothing, right? But if you know, like I know, there is work that is required to build a relationship, right? Like when you meet a new guy and you are getting to know him, right? There is communication that has to happen. Sometimes there are dates. There are those long phone conversations if it's a good connection and you're getting to know all about this person, right? You're spending time with them. You are also doing some self reflection to ensure that you're even prepared for where the relationship is going, right? And the same is true with active waiting in those seasons or God is preparing you for what is to come to light, right? Sometimes that means really doubling down and doing the work to seek God like never before, right? That means that you are actively in pursuit of intimacy with God like never before. It means that because, like I said, when you are in a space of darkness, when it is dark, you need guidance, right? You need to know whether you should go a step forward, whether you should take a step back, whether you should be still. And so, when active waiting, it is this season of really needing to double down and seek God like you've never sought Him before, right? And I know that it's repetitive, but I really want you to receive this because we live in a world where everybody wants to see what's happening in the light, right? Everybody wants to see the spotlight, the highlight reel. You need to be posting and you need to be sharing and you need to be taking pictures and selfies and having all of these amazing things to say. And it's always great when God can get the glory from our lives in the public eye. But in order for that to be the case, there is work that needs to be done in seasons of active waiting. There are times when no one else has access to you or no one else is getting as much of your time investment as God. And Psalm 90:17 says it much more eloquently than I am saying it. Again, Psalm 90:17, and it says, "May the favor of the Lord our God rest on us. Establish the work of our hands for us." Yes, establish the work of our hands. And I think in this scripture, it is in a direct demonstration of what it means to be actively waiting because it says, "May the favor of the Lord our God rest on us," right? So this means that we are taking refuge in God in this season, right? As we do in all seasons, but in this season, even more intentionally, even more specifically, we are allowing the Spirit to rest on us. We are soaking it up and specifically allowing the work of our hands to be established in that we are resting in Him. So, if you are challenged with actively waiting, right? If you are one of those people who are like, okay, God, I've been fasting for 7 days. You told me to fast for 7 days, but I don't hear anything. You didn't tell me anything. You haven't showed me anything. Now what? before you go back and take control or do what you think you need to do, maybe you should consider sitting in stillness. Maybe you need to extend your prayer time. Maybe you need to extend your meditation time. Maybe, in fact, you need to extend the fast, right? Maybe in this season, God is going to require more of you, right? And I know you are ready to bounce back. You are ready to share that story. You are ready to share that experience. And I'm not saying that you should not. However, if you really are intentional about making the impact and the income that God has predestined for you, then you need this time. You need to take advantage of this season of seeking Him for the clarity, right? As we talk about in cornerstone number 1 of the bounce back blueprint, clarity, right? Faith and focus are the foundation. Sometimes we need to go back and re-gird ourselves in the foundation. We need to make sure the foundation is solid, right? Sometimes it is something that we request from God, that we get time to pause, right? But sometimes God imposes a pause on us because He recognizes that we need a bit more time of preparation for elevation, right? And I need you to receive that. So, how are you actively engaging in the work of waiting on God in this season, right? When you are waiting on God, you are not to be sitting there just tapping your fingers and wiggling your toes. How are you seeking Him, right? How are you serving Him? How are you investing your time in solidifying the foundation of your bounce back blueprint by solidifying your relationship with God? Where is it that you are lacking clarity on this journey, and what is it costing you because you refuse to invest in the process and the power of active waiting? I want you to really sit with that for a moment. And then, of course, like I said, I had 3 truths that I wanted to share. And here's the final truth. And I want you to hear my heart with this truth, because this is something for me that was a struggle for a very long time. And when I am not girded, right? When I'm not focused on what I'm doing in the dark, when I am not actively and intentionally engaging and investing in the work of active waiting, then this is what happens. And that is the struggle gets real, right? And how many times have you said to a friend or even posted on your social media like the struggle is real or the struggle was real? I respect the truth that the struggle gets real, but here is what I also know to be true. The struggle gets real when you forget to be and do what God has called you to do. And I want to tell you a short story about how this became so true for me. Last year, I took swim lessons. And I took swim lessons because obviously I thought I did not know how to swim. And so it was like an 8-week session. And probably by the third week of getting to know the instructor a bit more and her being able to take some one on one time with us, she said to me, "Tiffany, you can swim." Right? I could swim underwater. I was having challenges with traditional swimming, right? With the stroke. And she said, it's not that you don't know how to swim, right? She said, you are kicking way too much and not breathing enough. And this happens to be the case for us so often, right? Because when the struggle gets real, like I said, it's because we forget to be and do what God called and created us to, right? So when a lot of times when we don't know how to do something, instead of looking within, we look what we're without. And so I was looking at the other people in our class who were doing really well with swimming. I could see them kicking their feet very rapidly, in fact. What I could not see was how intentional they were about breathing. And in fact, she told me I was forgetting to breathe. But that's what happens when we forget to be and do what we were created to. One of the very basic um, things that we as human beings need to do is breathe. We need to breathe. So, how is it that I forgot to do one of the very most basic things that I was called and created to do? And because I did, I was struggling to do something. I was struggling to do what was next because in the now I had forgotten the basic premise of what I was called and created to do, which and that moment was breathe. And this is what happens to us, right? So we forget who we are and what we were created to do. And then when we get out into the quote unquote deep waters, we panic. We're kicking our feet and we're moving our arms very quickly and we're looking around, but we're not breathing, or we're not sharing our story, or we aren't embracing our truth, or we aren't taking the time to connect with God, right? We aren't saying the words that He's given us in divine downloads. All of those things begin to cease because we feel like the struggle has gotten real, and the struggle has gotten real because we have stopped doing what we are called and created to do. And so I want you to consider where in this season, because of how deep the waters have gotten, or how dark it is where you are, or how much more time you have to be in the dark, I want you to consider how you've begun to struggle in this season for those reasons. Right? Have you begun to struggle because you've forgotten the truth that when you are weak, God is strong, right? When you are in the dark, He can be the eyes that you need to see, but you have to call on Him, right? Basic premises. And what happens when we forget who we are and the struggle begins to be real, then we forget that we have the power to do all things through Him, right? So when I got to the point where I could not breathe properly and I wasn't moving forward, I would start to kick harder. But kicking harder wasn't going to help because I wasn't doing the one thing that I needed to be doing in that season. And so when we get in those deep waters and that happens, we start to find ourselves auditioning for roles that God has already assigned to us. And so I want you to consider in this season what you are applying for, what you are trying to convince others of, what you are working doubly and triply hard to do, that God has already saying is yours. You have it. You can do it. Go forward. But because it's a little more dark, because the waters are a little deeper, because you are now quote unquote swimming next to people who don't look like you or sound like you or do it the way God has told you to do it, you question it. And I need you to remember that now is what's next. God has already given you the green light to go. He has already cleared the check that was deposited on your behalf. Stop auditioning for roles that God has already given you the approval and the affirmation to execute in excellence. Now is what's next. And when the struggle gets real for you, when you begin to forget to do those basic things, I want you to grab hold of Isaiah verse 30, Isaiah chapter 30, verse 21. And it says, whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. And I know it's coincidental, right? But when you are swimming and you are doing that traditional stroke, you turn from the right to the left to get that breath, to get that air, right? And so I want you to consider when the waters are deep and you feel like you're drowning or you're kicking and swinging harder, but you forget to breathe, right? You forget to take in that air, that oxygen that is the Spirit of God. That is God's voice. I need you to remember Isaiah 30:21. Your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. In other words, God is saying, breathe. I'm here. Remember what I called you to. Remember what I have for you to do. Now is what's next. Now is what's next. If you do not hear God in your ear saying, no, you're going the wrong way, no, this is not what I said, then you need to know that what you are doing now is what's next. And if you aren't hearing God at all, then you have to go back to reminder number one, that what you do in the dark is what comes to light. And remember reminder number two, that there is some active waiting that is part of the work that is worship. And you got to be seeking him for clarity. And because I recognize how challenging it can be in this season with so much going on and with so many people having so much to say, we get hit with conspiracy theories and all types of different messages from different people who think they are leaders and all of the things, right? On top of our everyday responsibilities as beacons of love and light, of as moms and wives and spouses and partners and friends and daughters, on top of everything else that's going on, we still have to be able to invest the time necessary to hear the voice of God for any of this to make sense, right? We have to have the time and the space to prioritize the power of clarity. And because of that, again, I am hosting this free opportunity for you to not only engage in some much needed self-care, but it's a training opportunity for you to learn the currency of clarity. In other words, what I want to leave you with and what I want you to encourage you to consider while you're listening and you're thinking, should I register for this? Should I not? What is it costing you? What is not having clarity now costing you now? And what is it going to cost you for what is next? If you don't have clarity now, then a lack of clarity is also going to be what's next. And so I am challenging and encouraging, imploring, in fact, you to join us for this opportunity on Tuesday, July 17th, or excuse me, Tuesday, July 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the currency of clarity. And you can get the link to join us in the show notes to share this wisdom, to share if you've been blessed by this episode of the podcast. I feel so strongly and so deeply in my spirit that there are so many who need to hear this. And so even if it's not something that you normally do, please, if you've been blessed by this episode, take a screenshot, share it to your social media, tag me in it if you need to, because I know there are others who are struggling with clarity, in this season. And if they don't receive the clarity, if they don't know how to seek the clarity, then the next season is going to be very repetitious of the same. And ain't nobody got time for that. So please be sure to share this episode and the link to register for the currency of clarity training with your friends, with your coworkers, with your family members. Of course, if you have not already, please take 2 minutes and leave a review. If you're really good with those text fingers, it won't even take you 2 minutes. Just tap that review button, leave a review, talk about how the podcast has blessed you, because in doing so, you will be blessing someone else. And of course, when we're blessed, we want to pass it on. And I have so been blessed by not only being able to share this podcast with you, but so many of the other divine downloads that God has entrusted me with. And I am excited to share those with you on July 14th for the Currency of Clarity training. So make sure you register. I am so excited to chat with you there. And of course, until next time, I need you to remember, God is not going to play you. But if you are in a season where you are forgetting to be and do what he has called you to, sis, you are playing yourself. Be blessed.